Hey guys, so I wanted to talk about some things with my house that I feel like are happening behind the scenes. I've mentioned before that I have a pretty substantial backyard. I think that basically the plot of land that the house sits on is smaller than the plot of land that is just yard. And there were a lot of things, let's call them, that were done by previous owners, I assume, that needed cleaned up. So a good example of this is that there were old cinder blocks under my front porch. Why they were under there, I don't know. I'm under the assumption that some sort of project was done with the house that involved leftover cinder blocks, and instead of disposing of them, they just threw them under the front porch. So this is actually a good starting place for the list of things that I've done, because it was one of the first things that I did. I have this little walkway along the side of the house between my house and the neighbor's house. It's just like a little stretch of sidewalk that runs along the side of the house, and it had been completely covered by ivy. Like completely, you couldn't see the sidewalk at all. It was completely covered by ivy. Now, I did not realize that the ivy had grown the way that it had, because it happened like in the winter months when I wasn't going outside for any reason. When I first moved into the house, there was some ivy there, but it was not very much. And then, I'm not sure what month it was, I went outside and realized that it had completely taken over the whole side of the house. So when I was ripping that out, once again, I'm very thorough in things like this. Like, I didn't just rip it out and call it a day. I dug up all of the roots and made sure that I just like completely eradicated it from the side of the house so that it couldn't grow back, which it hasn't grown back yet, so I think I might have actually gotten it all. But some of the ivy had leached its way underneath of the porch, and the porch has like a covering on it so that you can't actually get underneath of the porch, like for pest control. And I removed this covering so that I could rip all of the ivy out and get all of the roots and things that were underneath of the porch, and that's when I found all of the cinder blocks. There were over a dozen of them under there, and they were like legitimate cinder blocks that were down there. So I got all the blocks out, removed all the ivy. That was the first thing that I did outside. The second thing, I believe, was completely uprooting and redoing the entire landscaping along the side of the house. I have this little sort of flower bed situation that runs along the length of the other side of the house from where the ivy was. So the ivy was on this side of the house. The little like landscaping is on that side of the house, and that side of the house faces an alleyway. So I completely, like I said, just like dug the entire thing up, dug out anything that was there, and basically started from scratch. There was even a tree over there that we ripped out, and I kept some of the things that were already planted there, but like rearranged them, and then got some bushes, or I don't think they're actually considered bushes. I think they're called hostas, that are a bush-like plant, let's say that. I don't know how to actually refer to them, because in my mind they look like bushes, but I got those from my sister and planted those over there. I also had to clean up a bunch of leaves that were left over from last year before I moved into the house that were all over the yard. Next on the list, and this was probably the biggest project by far and is still currently ongoing, which was cleaning up this huge mess that was at the end of my yard. So I had all of these little like trees down at the end of my yard that I believe were saplings from a bigger tree that I have in my yard. I think it's a cedar tree, I think is what my brother told me, but it sort of looks like a pine tree. And I had all these saplings that were grouped together at the end of the yard that, like I said, I believe came from the bigger tree. And they were just kind of in this random cluster, did not look good. But on top of that, at some point, someone that had lived here had thrown a bunch of dead brush on top of the trees. So not only was there all this brush to clean up, but also some of the trees had died because the brush was thrown on top of them. So I had to clean all the brush up, cut the trees down. Once I had all that cleared out, I of course had to get rid of everything. I had to dispose of all of the brush and the trees and all of that stuff. And then I had these concrete deer, like statues, I guess you would call them, down kind of wedged into all of this mess. They were just sitting down there. So I had to like get rid of those, which I gave to a family member, took them, and then for whatever reason, there were cinder blocks buried in the yard, in the same spot that all this other stuff was going on. They were literally buried in the yard. Initially, we thought that there might have been like a shed down there at some point, or some sort of structure of some kind that had been ripped down and removed like long before I got the house. But I don't know if that's actually the case, because it wasn't like there was a lot of them down there. It was 3 in total, but still super bizarre. Why were they buried in the yard? I don't know. But I had to dig those out, which wasn't a good time. 2 of them were cinder blocks. So cinder blocks have holes in the middle of them, and tree roots had grown through the holes. So not only did I have to dig them out, I also had to cut through these roots that had grown through the middle of the blocks to be able to get them out of the ground. And then the last one that I just removed the other day was a literal like concrete slab that was down there, which is so heavy I couldn't lift it. I managed to dig it up and kind of push it out of the hole, and that's all the farther I could get with it. So that's just sitting at the end of my yard, and that's going to be fun to get rid of because it's super heavy. But as I mentioned, this project is still ongoing because, of course, with all of the brush and stuff laying down there and the trees and all that, and like the statues were sitting down there, all that stuff, all of the grass is dead in that part of the yard. Like, it's just a sheet of dirt down there. So now that I got all of the cinder blocks and stuff dug up, and I got the holes filled in, which I'll explain that a little more in depth here in a minute. I filled in the holes because obviously there were holes in the yard from where I had dug the cinder blocks out. Now the last step is to obviously plant grass down there. But before I do that, I need to dig up the area a little bit to cut down the tree stumps that are down there. There were little trees, so they're maybe like that big, I would say, the tree stumps. But I need to kind of dig around them and cut them so that they're actually under the ground, because you obviously don't want them sticking up out of the ground if you're going to be mowing around them. So that's the last step, is to basically get that area prepped so that I can plant fresh grass down there. And then that project will finally be done after, I couldn't even tell you how long ago it was that I started working on that, because initially I did all the cleanup and everything and then didn't mess with it for a while, and then I started working on getting the blocks dug up, which was an ordeal. And now that I finally have those dug up and filled the holes in, now I'm in the last phase of the project. The thing that I'm working on right now is digging out the space underneath of my back porch. My property is on a slight incline, and so my porch is actually lifted pretty high off of the ground. So the space underneath of it is much bigger than you would typically have with a porch. So there's enough space under there that I realized I could use it for storage. The plan is, hopefully, that I'll be able to store my lawnmower under there, because I don't actually have a shed outside. So currently my lawnmower is being kept in my basement, so it's not ideal, right? Ideally, I would have somewhere outside to store it. So I thought about using this space under the porch, which sounds simple enough, but there were a bunch of rocks and bricks and stones and whatever have you that had been thrown under the porch. So currently, the big project I've been working on for the last week has been clearing all of this stuff out from underneath of the porch. So I currently have stones and stuff just like heaped in a huge pile outside by my porch that I have dug out from underneath. And I got the worst of the rocks and bricks and stones and all that stuff, all the stuff that needs to be disposed of. I got all of that out. Now it's just a matter of digging it out a little bit to level out the ground so that it's even with the sidewalk. But for the most part, I have it dug out. So now it's just a matter of putting a door on there. So currently I have like coverings on the porch, just like on the front porch to keep critters out from underneath of the porch. But what I want to do is turn one of the coverings into a door that you can open and close, and obviously I'll put a lock on it so that you have easy access to the space underneath the porch, because currently the coverings are screwed on. So that's kind of the big step to finishing that project. Other than disposing of all of the rocks and stuff, I have to make a door so that you can actually access it to use it for storage. The worst part of it, like I said, was getting all of the rocks out, which I officially finished doing that. And that is also where I got the dirt to fill the holes in the end of my yard that I mentioned, where I had dug up the cinder blocks. I used the dirt from underneath of my back porch to fill all those holes in, which was like a great use of the dirt, because there was a lot of dirt under there that needed to be dug out. So that got rid of a decent amount of it, honestly, because it took a few buckets worth of dirt to fill all those holes in. I think that comes to the conclusion of all of the projects that I have done outside of my yard. It's been a lot of work, and I feel like sometimes because I don't really go outside in my yard, I don't really realize how much time I put into this stuff, because it is a lot of time and it's super labor intensive, so it's super tiring. I've spent the whole last week working on this porch project, and I've just been so exhausted from it. I have bruises all over my arms, I have bug bites all over my legs, so I'm kind of taking probably the next few days to just rest and not work on anything outside at all, which is usually how all of my outside projects go. I go very intensely at the project for a few days until I finish it, and then I'm just exhausted and don't work on anything outside for like weeks at a time. So I think I'll end off this video talking about some future projects for the yard because there's still so much more that I want to do out there. But luckily I'm getting down to the end of the list of things that I plan to do myself. So some of the things that I want to have done is that I have some tree stumps that I want to have removed. I want to have like more sidewalk put in to create like a patio area out there because I don't have one currently. So I want to kind of expand the sidewalk away from the house a little bit to create like a little patio area outside. The big thing that I want to have done that's going to be super expensive is that I want to have a fence put in. I currently do not have a fence around my yard, which is not ideal because both sides of my yard face alleyways, and they're decently busy alleys. Like, I didn't realize until moving in, I never would have thought that they would be busy alleys, but they're actually used a decent amount. So there's constantly people driving along those two alleys that border my yard. So I definitely want to have a fence put up, not just for privacy, but also to keep random people from walking in my yard. I actually had to put signs up, like private property signs, because people were coming into my yard. And like, if you don't have signs posted, you're like liable if something happens to them while they're on your property.